role-based authorization is really important in any type of application. So in this video, we're going to implement the role-based authorization for a Next.js application with NextAuth. Here's the application that we are going to implement in this tutorial, and we have a user profile and also an admin dashboard. So we are going to enforce the role-based authorization in a way that only admin users can have access to the admin dashboard, but any authenticated user that has signed into our application can have access to the user profile. So without any extra explanation, let's get right into it. Okay, open up the Next.js project, and in this project, as you can see, we have a admin page that we are going to protect in a way that only admin users can have access to it. And then we have the profile page here that we are going to protect from unauthenticated users. So every user, whether admin or a normal user, can have access to this page. And then we have the home page that all user, whether unauthenticated or not, can have access to it. So let's implement the role-based authorization in this Next.js project. So the first thing we should do here is to install the NextAuth. So here I'm going to say npm I NextAuth. Okay, it is installed, and now in the next step we need to create the NextAuth catch all routes. So here in the app directory, I'm going to create a new directory called API, and inside it we're going to create the auth directory, and then inside it we're going to create the NextAuth catch all routes. So here in the square brackets, I'm going to put 3 dots here and then NextAuth. So pay attention to the spelling of the NextAuth here, and then we're going to create a route handler, route.ts file. Okay, and then here the first thing we should do is to create the auth options. So I'm going to export const auth options, okay, and then set its type to auth options from the NextAuth, and then set it to an object. And here the first thing we should specify is the providers list. So here I'm going to say providers and set it to a list, and then we need to configure the Google provider. So remember, this is not a tutorial on how to configure the Google provider with NextAuth. So we're going to go through this real quick, and if you're not familiar with how you can configure the Google provider with NextAuth, you can watch this video, and the link is here to find out how you can get the client ID and secret from the Google Console API. So here we just copy the configuration for Google provider. The first step is to import the Google provider from the NextAuth. So here I'm going to import the Google provider from the NextAuth/provider/Google, and then here we can use the Google provider inside the providers list. Okay, and then we pass an object here, and here we can specify the client ID and the client secret of our Google Console API. Okay, so I paste them here, and as you can see, I have created a Google client ID inside the env file, and also Google client secret in that file, and then we can read the value of this variable and pass them to the client ID and the client secret. As I said, you can watch the video about the Google provider to see how you can get this client ID and client secret from the Google Console API. So let me show you what's going on inside the env file. As you can see, we have the Google client ID and the Google client secret here. So let's get back to our route handler, and then here we need to create our handler. So I'm going to say const handler and then set it to NextAuth function, which comes from the NextAuth. As you can see, it is imported from the NextAuth here, and then we pass the auth options that we've created here. So here we just put the auth options object here, and then we can export this handler from this API route. So here I'm going to export an object, and inside it we export the handler as the get function and also handler as the post function. So let's save this. Now we can log in into our application with the Google provider. So before running the application, let me show you what's going on inside the components directory. As you can see here, we have an app bar here, a providers. So inside the providers, we wrap the children of this component with a session provider that comes from the NextAuth/React. So in this way, the children of this component can access to the use session hook, which returns the session of the NextAuth. And then in the layout component, actually the root layout, we have wrapped the children of the root layout with the providers component that I've just talked about. And then we have the app bar above the children of the root layout. So if I go to the app bar, you can see it's a header component that has 3 links, a link to the homepage, a link to the user profile, and then a link to the admin dashboard. And then we have a sign in button in the header component. And if I go to the sign in button, you can see in implement this component, first we get the session of the next auth with use session hook that comes from the next auth/react, and inside it we check if the session is valid, and if the user is inside this session we can render the username and also the image of the user, and then we render a sign out button alongside with the name of the user. And if the session is not valid or session does not have a user object, that means the user is not authenticated, we just render a sign in button out of this component. So that's it for these pre-built components for this project. And if you're familiar with my projects, you know that they are the same with my other tutorials about the next auth. So now we can run our application. So here I'm going to say npm run dev. Okay, I'm going to open up the browser here, and as you can see we have the home page, we have the user profile page, and here because we have not signed in yet, we don't have any data about the user. And then we have the admin dashboard, which is a really simple page that we are going to just protect it from the unauthenticated users as well as the normal users. So only the admin should have access to this page. So now let's click on the sign in here. And as you can see, we have a sign in with Google button here. So if I click on that, you can see now we have signed in into our application with the data about my Google account. So you can see my name here and also the image profile of my Google account. Okay, so we have successfully integrated the Google provider with the next auth. Okay, so now let's go for the implementation of the role-based authorization with next auth. Before doing that, we need to configure the Prisma with next auth with Prisma adapter. So when a user signs into our application, the data about the user will be saved into our local database. So now let's get back to the VS Code, and here let's install the Prisma client and also the Prisma adapter for next auth. So here I'm going to say npm I Prisma client and also add auth/Prisma adapter. Okay, and now we can install the Prisma itself. So here I'm going to say npm install Prisma --save dev. Okay, it is installed, and now we can initialize the Prisma. So here I'm going to say npx Prisma init. So here, as you can see, it creates a Prisma directory and also a Prisma schema here. So let's open the Prisma schema here, and as you can see, it is configured with the PostgreSQL provider, but for simplicity of this tutorial, we're going to go ahead with the SQLite. So here I'm going to change it to SQLite, and here as you can see, it has a database URL. It reads the database URL from a variable with this name from the env file. So we need to go to the env file, and then let me scroll down here, and as you can see we have a database URL with the file /dev.db. Okay, if your database URL is a Postgres URL, you have to change it to this string here. So this is for creation of the SQLite database inside the Prisma directory. So let's close this off, and let's go to the documentation of the auth.js. You can find it from the auth.js and database adapter section, and let's scroll down here to find the schema. Okay, so let's copy the schema here. Okay, let's go back to the VS Code project, paste the schema in the schema.prisma file. So we have an error here, so let's see what's going on here. Since we are using SQLite database, we should remove this db.txt because it is not supported in the SQLite. So let's get rid of this and also this. Okay, so let's save this and we're good to go. But since we are going to implement the role-based authorization, we need to add a role field inside our user model. So let's find the user model. As you can see, it has an ID, name, email verified, image, and have a relation with accounts and sessions model. So here after the image, I'm going to add a role and set its type to string. Okay, so let's save this, and now we can run our migration. So here in the terminal, I'm going to say npx prisma migrate dev and then set a name for it. I'm going to go for init and then hit enter. As you can see here, it creates a migrations directory and also a dev.db file, which is a SQLite database. So the important tip here is adding the role field into our user model. So don't forget to do this. Okay, so now we're done with the Prisma section. So let's close this off and let's get back to our route handler of the next auth. And here we should configure the Prisma adapter for the next auth. In order to do that, the first thing we should do do is to create a global Prisma client. So every time we're going to use the Prisma client, we don't need to create a new one. We just create one global client and we can use it throughout our application. So here in the src directory, we're going to create a lib directory, and then inside it, we're going to create the prisma.ts file. Okay, and here we're going to paste the code for creating and exporting a global Prisma client from this file. So I've got this code from the documentation of the Prisma. You can find it in the GitHub of this tutorial. I put a link to the description below, and I would be happy if you give a star to this GitHub repo. Okay, so let's save this and let's close this off, and let's get back to the route handler of the next auth. In the auth options object, we're going to say adapter and set it to Prisma adapter, which comes from the @auth/Prisma adapter, and just pass the Prisma client. So here I'm going to say Prisma, and as you can see, it is imported from the /lib/Prisma file, the file that we've just created. Okay, and let's put a comma here, and now let's restart our server and let's refresh the page here. Okay, so let's sign in. Okay, as you can see, I have signed into our application, and now let's get back to the VS Code and run the Prisma Studio. So here I'm going to say npx Prisma Studio. Okay, and as you can see inside the user model, now we have a record that is keeping the information about the authenticated user. And as you might notice here, we don't have a role inside our database. So we need to manually add the role into the user's object. So in order to do that, let's get back to our VS Code, and here in the route handler of the next auth and the Google provider, we can add a profile callback function. Okay, and then it gets a profile, and it should return an object that is in match with this user model. It should have an ID, name, email verified, image, and role. And since all of them except the ID are optional, we can skip them in the returning object of the profile callback function. But if we want to save them into our database, we should include them in that returning object. So let's get back to the route handler, and here we return an object. Okay, the first thing we should add is ID, which is going to be profile.sub. So this profile is the actual object that Google provider sends to the next auth when the user sign in into our application with Google provider. So later in this video, I will log the profile object and I can see what's going on there. But for now, just keep moving along with this tutorial and know that this profile has a sub, which kind of the ID of the user. And then we should specify the name here, which is going to be a template here, and let's add the profile, the given name, and then a space here, and then include the profile, the family name. Okay, and then we're gonna have the email and set it to profile, the email. Okay, and the last thing we should add is the role, which we are going to say if profile has a role inside it. Okay, set it to profile, the role, and if it's not there, just set it to user. So if the profile object has a role property inside it, we can set the role to the profile.role, and if it doesn't have a role inside it, we just set the role of the user to a normal user. Okay, and now we should configure the callbacks object here in order to save the role of the user into the user object. So after the providers list, I'm going to specify the callbacks object, and then first I'm going to specify the JWT, which is going to be an async function. Okay, it takes an object which contains the token and also the user object, and in this function we should combine the token and user object. So every time the user log in into our application or using the useSession hook or getServerSession, this function will be called if the strategy of the next auth is JWT. I will talk about it in a second, but for now let's return an object here and then spread the token and also spread the user. Okay, and now let's get back to the initial section of the auth options, and here we should specify the session object, and then inside it we should specify the strategy and set it to JWT. Okay, and then let's put a comma here. The strategy of the next auth can be JWT or database. If the strategy is set to database, the JWT callback will not be called. So in order to call the JWT function every time user log into our application, we should set the strategy to the JWT. Okay, and then we need to create the async function session, which takes the object that contains session and token. So this token is this object that is returning from the JWT function. And then here inside the session function, we're going to set the session.user.role to the token.role. Okay, we have an error here, and that's because the shape of the user doesn't have a role inside it. So we're going to fix that in a second, but for now let's return the session from this function. Okay, and now let's fix the shape of the user. So here in the lib directory, I'm going to create a types.d.ts file. First, I'm going to import the next auth from the next auth, and then declare a module next auth. Okay, and inside it, we're going to create an interface session. Okay, and inside this session, we're going to have an user, which its type is going to be user from the Prisma client. So as you can see, it is imported from the Prisma client. So if I hover on that, you can see it has an ID, name, email verified, image, and role. Okay, so let's get back to the route.ts file, the route handler of the next auth. As you can see, the error is still there. And now if I hover on the user, you can see the shape of the user has a role inside it. Okay, but the shape of the token is unknown. So let's redefine the shape of the token. Let's go back to the types.d.ts file and let's import the JWT from the next auth/JWT. So the type of the token is type JWT. So here I'm going to say declare module next auth/JWT, and then inside it we're going to define a type JWT. Okay, and set it to the user type from the Prisma. So as you remember, the user is from the Prisma/client. So let's save this, and you can see the error is already gone. Okay, so in this way we can fix the type problem of the user inside the session object. And in the session function here, you can see we return the session that has the role inside it. So every time the session is called from the get server session or use session hook, first the JWT function will be run, and then it return an object that contains the token and also the user. And here we get this object from this parameter here, and then we set the session.user.role to the token.role, and then we return this session, which will be catched by the get server session function or use session hook. So now let's save this and get back to the Prisma Studios. Let's delete this record here. Okay, so here let's sign in again. Okay, and here let's refresh, and as you can see, the role of the user is now user, but here as you can see, the image of the user is not present here, and that's because here in the profile callback of the Google provider we didn't get the image of the user. So here we're going to say image and set it to profile.picture, so it has a picture inside it. And let's save this. Let's get back to our browser. Let's sign out. Okay, the Prisma, let's remove the record here, and now let's sign in here. Okay, so let's get back to the Prisma and let's refresh, and as you can see, now the image has a value, and now we have access to the profile picture of the user that we've got from the Google API. Okay, and now we are moving to the next section, which is enforcing the role-based authorization. So here as you can see, the user is logged in, but the type of the user is user, but we can access to the admin page. So in order to prevent that, let's get back to the VS Code, and here inside the src directory, side by side the app directory, it is very important, it should be side by side the app directory. We're going to create a middleware.ts file, and here if we are not going to implement the role-based authorization, we can just export and then default inside a curly braces from next auth/middleware, and then we should say for which route we are going to enforce this middleware. So I'm going to say export a config object and set into an object that has a matcher inside it. It is going to be a list, and oops, we forgot the const here. And now inside this matcher, we can say that we are going to use this middleware with the /admin and all its subroutes, and also for the profile page. Okay, and let's get back to our browser and let's sign out here. And if I click on the user profile, you can see we will be redirected to the login page, and that's because we're not signed in. So if I sign in, and now if I click on the user profile, you can see that I can access to the user profile, and here you can see the data about the user. But if I click on the admin dashboard, you can see I can access to the admin dashboard, although I am not a admin user, I am a normal user. So in order to enforce the role-based authorization, let's change the middleware file. So I go back to the VS Code here. First, we need to import with auth from the nextauth/middleware, and here I'm going to say export default with auth, and then pass an object here, and inside that object I'm going to specify the authorize function, which is going to be an async one, and it takes an object as a parameter that has the rec and also the token inside it. And here we should return a boolean, which means that whether a user is authorized to move forward or not. So if we return true, it means that the user is authorized to access a specific page or API, and if we return false, it means that the user is not authorized to do that. So here first we check if rec.nextURL.pathname start with /admin, then we're going to return true. So actually we are checking that if the user is accessing the admin or one of its subroute pages, so we should return true, which means the user is authorized if the role of the user is admin. Otherwise, we just return false, which means the user is not authorized to access these pages. So here we just return token.role and check if the role of the user is admin. So if the role of the user is admin, this statement will return true. Otherwise, this statement will return false, which means that the user is not authorized to move forward. And then if this condition is falsy, which means that the user is not going to access the admin page or one of its subpages, we just want to check if the user is authenticated or not. So here we just return the token. So if the user is authenticated, the token is an object, but if the user is not authenticated, the token is undefined. So we just turn the token to a boolean. So I'm going to put the double exclamation mark here and then return the token. So remember that this double exclamation here turn the token object to a boolean. If it's undefined, it returns false. Otherwise, it returns true. Okay, so here we forgot to put an arrow here. It's a arrow function. Okay, and I think we're done here. So this middleware is being enforced for admin and its subpages as well as the /profile. So if the path name of the next URL of the request is starting with admin, we should check if the role of the user is admin. We just return true, which means the user is authorized to access that page. And if the role of the user is not admin, we just return false. And otherwise, if the user is accessing the profile page, we just check if the token is not undefined, which means that we are checking if the user is authenticated or not. So let's save this and let's get back to our browser. Okay, let's see if we can access to the user profile. It's okay. And let's see if we can access to the admin dashboard. As you can see, we are headed to the login page because we're not an admin user. So here let's go to the Prisma Studio, and here let's change the type of the user to admin. Okay, and let's save the changes and let's get back. Let's refresh. Let's sign out and again sign in, and here as you can see the role of the user is now admin. And if I click on the admin dashboard, you can see we can have access to the admin dashboard because we are a admin user. So yeah, in this way with the NextAuth middleware, we can enforce the role-based authorization with our Next.js application. So that's it for this tutorial, and if you have any idea about the topic of my next video, please tell me in the comment section below. And if you support me with subscription to my channel, I would be really happy. And if you like the video, that would be icing on the cake. So stay tuned for my next video and have a nice time. Bye bye.